Good evening. Thanks for sticking around through the day and into our last keynote talk for this Congress. It is a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Ashok Gulati to give the keynote address today. Ashok has had a really distinguished career, both as an academic and as a policymaker, and is one of the few people that I've seen who's very successfully combined the two. And I just want to talk very briefly about some of the highlights of his career. Ashok was a chair professor at the Institute of Economic Growth in Delhi and also the chief economist at the National Council of Applied Economic Research. He joined IFPRI in Washington, D.C. as their director of the Markets, Trade, and Institutions Division in 2001, and then moved back to India in 2006 as IFPRI's first director in Asia, based in New Delhi. He was also a member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister of India. And then in 2011, he was called by the Prime Minister to become the chairman of the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. And this commission is really an important one because it recommends the minimum support prices to the government of India for most of the major crops, over 24 of the major crops. It's a very controversial position and, of course, politically an important one. He was the first chairman to bring to bear the imperatives of the market economy and to the price recommendations that were being made for these crops. And under him, this commission really carried out some path-breaking work on to influence the trends in Indian agriculture, to inform price and policy recommendations, and to bring economics and economic rationale to bear upon the recommendations that he was making. Ashok has always been a real voice for policy reforms in the entire agricultural sector in India, from trying to transform farm subsidies to artificially impose restrictions on agricultural supply chains and to improving the public distribution system of food for consumers. And it's no wonder that he was again asked by the new government of India from a different political party to serve on a high-powered committee to reform the Food Corporation of India, which is the largest agricultural supply chain management company in Asia, if not the world. Ashok is currently the chair professor for agriculture at the Indian Council for Research in International Economic Relations in Delhi, which is a leading think tank. And he's published very extensively in national and international journals. He very frequently writes op-ed pieces in major national newspapers and has written more than 10 books on issues related to agriculture. I also want to mention that today is Ashok's 32nd wedding anniversary, and we are delighted that he has chosen to spend it with us in leading this cause for us, feeding 9 billion people. So please join me in welcoming Ashok to give us this keynote talk.
Well, thank you very much, Madhu. I'm sure you will not approve my standing here when my wife is in Delhi on this day. But this was a commitment given already. Well, thanks for sticking out for such a long time. Let me try to give you a political economy flavor of Indian agriculture, Indian food system, and the challenge of feeding India. From academics to policy, that's where I'm going to transact and take you along. There are 3 questions that I feel I'll try to cover. Who will feed India? This is a question actually earlier raised in the context of China by Lester Brown. And we have seen what has happened in the last 15-20 years in China. And I'll come back to that, what's likely to happen in India. So that's a big question. In the light of that question, we'll see how India has performed in the last 15-20 years and how in the coming 20 years or 30 years or 40 years it's likely to perform. There are challenges, there are no doubt about that. And some have cautioned us many of the resources are going to deplete much faster than perhaps what we think. But I also look at numerous business opportunities here. I'm an eternal optimist in that sense. Who will feed India? Usha made my task a little easier by giving you a flavor of India's food policy and food security issues. And also she left a few questions for me to respond on, especially the labor wage rate, what is happening. It's 1.25 billion today, likely to surpass China in 2028. We will be 1.46 billion at that time, and hopefully stabilize at 1.6 billion by 2050. Today, about 400 million people are living in urban areas in India. By 2030, 600 million are going to be in urban areas. Now, if we have to house them properly, the estimates are that we need at least one Chicago every year to construct. And these people are going to eat, and they are going to demand more of protein and more of vitamin, better food quality, because their income levels are going to be higher, and that has to come from the rural areas or perhaps produced in the urban areas, whichever the way, value chains. Scarce land, so there is going to be a lot of pressure on land from rising urbanization, water and energy. Let's say one of the very young nations, 65% of population below 35 years, but I'm concerned with average household expenditure on food is 45%. It's a percentage to expenditure, not income. So if you are comparing with income, take 30% out, because Indian saving rate hovers around 30%. So it's out of the total expenditure that you are spending, 45% is being still spent on food. And these people, when they are going to economically improve, and we do expect that India will be, for the next 20 years, at least 15 years, we will have a per capita income growing in real terms anywhere between 5 to 6%. And that's going to create huge pressure of demand on food. How will it come? This is compared to China. If you look at from 1 point, China is stabilizing here and will be coming down. In percentage terms to the global population, China will be coming down to 14.5%. We will be at about 17%. Today we are 17.4%. Now in the past also, there have been people who are quite skeptical about whether India can feed itself. I think the first major was Paddock brothers. They wrote a book in 1966, and the book title was Famine 1975. And their case was, nobody can save India on this planet. Millions will die. People will in fact forget about what had happened in China a few years back before that. In China between 1958 to 61, the Great Leap Forward, about 30 million people had died because of lack of food. And Paddock brothers were saying that the debacle that India is likely to face is going to be bigger than even China. It's a basket case. That's 1966. And at the same time, in the spring of 1966, we had 18,000 tons of high-yielding variety wheat, seeds coming from Mexico, Norman Borlaug, Sonara 64 and Lerma Rojo. These were the two varieties which were imported. And within 4 years, India, from a basket case, was talking about building buffer stocks of grains from domestic production. So between 67 to 72, everything dramatically changed. So this was, as Usha said, this was basically a public sector major policy, action, distribution, whatever had to be done was basically done by the public sector. And I'm reminded of those debates in 1960s in Parliament itself. Bitter debates in 1965 going on in the Parliament of India that this will not be a green revolution, this will be a red revolution because we'll become the slaves of the West forever because we'll be dependent for the seeds and so on and so forth. I think today's debate on GMO is much less critical than the debate of 1960s. And I'm hopeful that even today's debate of GMO we will overcome. Usha is somewhat restless, but it will come. That's my hope. It's not only Paddock Brothers. My institution where I served for 10 years in IFPRI, very scientific, one of the topmost brains in policy analysis in the world today, and my own colleagues came up in 1998 under 2020. I have no hesitation because I have bet with my colleague Peter Hazel, who came up with this, and that's all published on the IFPRI website, that by 2020 India will be importing 63 million tons of food grains. And with a thorough research and all that, because they are all researchers. I happened to be a reviewer of that at that time in 98. I was not still a part of IFPRI. And I said, Peter, no way. And he said, no. And the question came again, how long India will remain vegetarian? I'll close that story later on. But the fact is, they had put Chinese and Indonesian and other coefficients to get the demand for feed. India's demand for feed today is about 20 million tons. China is putting between 150 to 200 million tons for feed. And I'll come to that. How many people are consuming meat in India and what is the quantity of meat consumption and why it is so. But that's later. Government of India, even in 2006, we imported 6 million tons and we were preparing the 11th plan document. I was a part of that story at that time in some capacity advisory, and we found that they declared by 2011-12 India will be short of 10 million tons of food grains. This is just within 5-year plan. At the beginning of the plan and end of the plan they were saying we will be short by 10 million tons. Lately Hans Benswinger, another very respected researcher, he was in the World Bank earlier and good friend and I respect him a lot. He has come out in 2012, 73 million tons of imports of grains by India by 2039. Now this is the backdrop of some of the top research and including Government of India. What have we done? I don't want to get into the details of Green Revolution. Usha, thanks to you for explaining that. Driven by government in close collaboration with international centers. Surge 2. I think there was a major revolution which has not been talked about here in milk in India. And I'll give you a glimpse of that. And this was done in 70s and 80s and primarily driven by smallholders linking in co-ops, heavily supported by government investments. Not purely government, co-ops, but still a lot of support from the government. But the third surge that has come in the decade of 2000, Usha talked about BT cotton. So I don't want to spend time on that. But there is another which she did not talk about, and that is maize revolution. We have doubled our production. We have doubled our production within that, and India is now exporting maize about 4-5 million tons. And that is basically driven by private sector. So from government to co-op to private sector, that's the change that has happened. Look at the production, the curve is not as accelerating as one could imagine perhaps in China. When you draw that, it is much faster. And that is where the per capita consumption of cereals in India, or food grains in India, has been declining. Last 20 years, if you observe the data, the per capita consumption of cereal is declining, and the latest results of 2011 show that it is declining even in the lowest, poorest decile. So it's not only the high income groups where cereal consumption is coming down, even the poorest of the poor per capita consumption of cereal is coming down, and they are switching over to high value products. I do want to spend half a minute on this. If you look at India and US, compare that on the milk story. India was about 17 million tons in 50-51, when US was about 53-54 million tons at that time. US milk production today is about 91 or so. India is 136 and projected for the next 10 years. And this is all done by the smallholders of the country. The average herd size is only 4 animals. Only 4. And the average milk yield, because it's a buffalo dominated system, is only 4 kg, 4 point something, less than 5 kg a day. There is a huge improvement that can take place in the system, and for next 20 years you can have ample milk on that front. Overall agriculture, how that has been performing in the last 20 years, if we divide it into 2 decades, 90s and 2000, overall at all India level, the average is about 3%, 3.3%. 2000 decade, average is about 3.3%. But there are states where agriculture is growing at more than 7%. And interestingly, from political angle, these are, at least out of these 4-5 states, 3 states are those where the chief ministers have been returned back to power 3 times. Each time is 5 years. So 3 times. So the politics and economics of where the largest gains could be with the masses synchronizes very well there. And this gives you, and these are also most of the states where water is very scarce. Interestingly, those who have abundant resources, particularly water and good soil, they are the ones struggling in poverty. And those who know the value of water, this is one chief minister, when I was giving a talk there last year in his global summit, and I said we have to get more crop out of every drop. He said, Ashok, the slogan of the state is per crop, more drop. And that chief minister is today the Prime Minister of India. So you can think his focus and the maximum drip irrigation in India is in those states where water is scarce. Agriculture growing at almost 10% per annum for 10 years. You can imagine the impact of that on poverty and other things. And that's how it became an engine. Usha talked about our imports of pulses. Our biggest import is actually oil, edible oil, 10 million tons, about $10 billion worth of. But she didn't talk about how our exports have gone. Look at the acceleration in exports. Up to here, it was a different story. And from here, it seems to have taken off like anything. And what has happened suddenly? And this is a story, I'll come in a minute, what is driving all this growth and exports. But one more thing, it's not very high incentives to our farmers in terms of prices or high levels of protection. The Indian price system, Indian food price and the global prices are in fact coming to a convergence here. In fact, we have avoided all these spikes of the global prices. India was criticized in the global community for putting bans on exports of rice and wheat in 2006. But think from the political side, a country that has still the largest poor and malnourished people in terms of total number, and when the prices in the international market suddenly take a spike, they first think about protecting their own people. And I was 10 days back in the World Bank, and Will Martin gave a very beautiful presentation of a paper. They have done the global analysis, and they found that those countries which can protect their poor in the first year in the short run, when there is huge price volatility, the spike of 2007-8, but later on gradually allow that to integrate with the global prices, the decline in poverty is 3 times faster in India between 2004 and 11 than it was between 93 and 2004. We could avoid the spike because that is when the biggest problem comes, but gradually when you integrate with the world economy, and that is where the real incentives for the farmers came, and I'll show what it has done to Indian farming. But on exports, what are the major elements of exports? It's a very diversified basket of exports. But one that may be useful here is on the cereal exports. Think about 2006-07 when India was importing 6 million tons of wheat, and 2007 India put an export ban on wheat and rice. But in 2011-12, that was a major challenge when I joined the government, and my first report said India must export or open up exports, and at least 15 million tons more must go out of the country, otherwise we are sitting on a crisis of plenty. And I remember the Food Corporation of India chairman came and he said, Ashok, you are coming from outside and you come with these wild suggestions to the government. If the government allows even 1 million ton going out of the country, I'll give you a treat in a 5-star hotel. I said, all right. This was my first report in March 2011. We struggled, we worked, and that's the political economy. Food Ministry would not like to release any food because they were thinking of launching the Food Security Act. I'll come to that later. But then Agriculture Ministry, the Finance Ministry, the Commerce Ministry, the Prime Minister's Office, the Planning Commission, you have to get to your side to change the direction of policy, because ultimately it's a cabinet decision, and if 5 ministers are in one and only one is on the other, you change. And we could get that after 6 months. When India opened exports for cereals, look at this. 12-13, India exported 22 million tons of cereals. And then 13-14 again about 20-21 million tons. Total of about 42-43 million tons in 2 years. India has not done this in the last 3,000 years of written history. And this is when my friends from IFPRI were projecting by 2020, India will be importing 63 million tons, and in 2013-14, 12-13, we are exporting 20 million tons. So things can change. And what had changed, I'll come And similar thing has happened in cotton. We are today the largest exporter of rice in the world. We are second largest exporter of cotton in the world. We are second largest exporter of meat in the world. Buffalo meat particularly. Beef, it comes under the category of beef. It's a funny situation. But overall, there is a trade surplus today of about $25 billion. Look at the food grain stocks at home. In 2006-07, our stocks were about 23 million. This had fallen below what was the minimum norm, so it had fallen below that. Normally, this is the norm. The country would like to keep always this much stock. And after that, look at where we went. We went more than double, almost triple, 200% above. And that is another big challenge right now. For the last 1 year, we have been saying liquidate, liquidate, liquidate. Another 15, 20 million tons immediately must be liquidated. What has driven this entire thing? From the specter of deficit, shortage, and somebody else feeding India, to India supplying to the global markets and perhaps helping some other countries. I feel that the growth in agriculture requires capital investments, particularly in a country like India. And what is that capital investment? Capital formation, investment in water, irrigation, and farm machinery. Usha talked about labor becoming expensive. Labor farm wages for the last 5 years are growing at 19% per annum in nominal terms. In real terms, they are growing about 7% per annum. This has never happened earlier in the history of India. And one of the reasons we have a paper on the website on this, the biggest factor is between 2004 and 13, overall GDP of the country has increased at 7.6% per annum. First time people started moving out of agriculture. Construction was booming and people started moving towards construction. So there was pressure, there was a pull factor on the Indian farming system in terms of wages. There was also, India introduced something called the right to work, 100 days assured employment to anybody who would like to have it. It's an act which we call the Manrega, the employment guarantee scheme, you can take it. But when we analyzed the data and worked on that state by state, we found that it's not the push factor from this Manrega, it is really the pull factor of development that is coming into action. And I was reminded of China's story that 150 million people had moved out of rural areas, agriculture, to build Shanghai and Beijing and other construction boom that happened. So India is beginning in that direction, and this is going to accelerate. So the chance that your wage rate will come down is not going to happen. So there is a huge business opportunity for mechanization. I think that takeoff point, the trigger is set now, and you can see what is happening to the tractor industry. Automobile industry may be in trouble, recession and slump, but tractor industry is growing at 15 to 20% per annum for the last 5 years, and it's going to continue like that. But all this investment requires incentives, prices, and that I'll show what had happened to prices. But let's see the investment pattern, what had happened. This is the total investment from public sector and private sector. If you look at from 80-81 onwards, the public and private were more or less half-half. And over time, the public sector investment in agriculture has come down, and private sector investment in green is all that is dominating. 85% of the investment in agriculture today is coming from private sector, and these are not corporates, these are farmers themselves. And 90% of that private investment is basically on two things, water and farm machinery. That's what is happening. But the other interesting thing was this, which is on this axis, that this capital formation in agriculture as a percentage of agriculture GDP, which used to hover at 10 to 12% of agri GDP, is today 20% of agri GDP. That means within agriculture there is a massive structural change that has taken place. And the reason for that is this. This is what had happened, which changed the entire complexion in agriculture. If you look at the agriculture prices versus the manufactured prices, 2004-5 being 100, up to here the story was very different. Marginal improvement, but after this there is more than almost 54% increase in agriculture prices over manufactured prices, and that changes the terms of trade in a two-sector economy in favor of agriculture. That means the entire incentive structure has changed in favor of agriculture. Now, was it a policy decision of the government? No. Marginally it could be. But what was happening in the global markets, and willy-nilly Indian policymakers also had to follow up with the global prices. That's why I showed that picture, that how our domestic prices have converged with the global prices. Earlier they were lower. So implicitly they were being taxed earlier compared to the global markets, but when they allowed the prices to gradually integrate with the global prices, and that changed the incentive structure, particularly for the farmers, and you saw in the previous slide what was happening to the capital formation of private sector. And that is what triggered the whole change. And now we don't know where to keep those stocks. That's the literal situation. I mean, we don't have that much of stocking capacity in the country, and now we are thinking you give to household 6 months quota almost free. Give them bins also so that they can keep it in their houses rather than in the godowns of Food Corporation of India, because you don't have that much of storage capacity. We have 50 million tons of storage capacity, rest is all lying in the open with a tarpaulin on it. Okay, this is for professors only. 90% you can explain through this, but what are the challenges? I think let me get on to that. One is Indian farming size. Now I was impressed by seeing the machines in the morning from Colorado, the big farms, and average holding size in India is 1.15 hectares. 1.15 hectares. And I remember almost 2 decades back, when I used to come to US, and I'll always request, okay, take me to some farmers. And in Illinois, one of my relations, they took me to a farmer. And they showed me a huge farm sitting in his truck, and we saw the huge farm. And when I asked him, have you ever gone to India or seen a farm in India? And when I told him this is the average holding size in India, I can never forget his response and so much of surprise. He said, but how do they do farming? With kitchen knives and forks? Yeah, that's right. They're doing with kitchen knives and forks and still can produce things cheaper than you. You know, I mean, as our Prime Minister was saying, the mission to the Mars has cost us less than one Hollywood film. That's the cost. And I was looking at the experiment of drones in Punjab and the cost of that. It's a low-cost economy. You can do wonders at that low cost. But this is going to be a challenge, and the bottom is swelling up with the average holding size declining, and the share that they are at present less than 2 hectares, those small and marginal farmers, their share in the land is about 44 hectares. But I have a hope that we can produce. When I look at China's average holding size, which is half of India's, 0.6 hectares. And they are producing double of food grain production than India. Double. From a smaller agriculture arable land. So it's all a matter of productivity, and that will give me next 15, 20 years easily to feed through smallholder. That's what. What is the biggest challenge? The challenge, political challenge, is this. India's public sector resources going towards agriculture, more than 80% are going through subsidies. We heard yesterday about free power in Punjab, certain pockets. We also heard about subsidized fertilizers earlier. Diesel was subsidized. These subsidies, perhaps political masters think, give them political returns very quickly. But the research that we did at IFPRI for a number of countries, including India, showed us that if you had $1 billion extra, should you be putting in rural roads, agri R&D, or even irrigation or health or education of rural people, the returns, marginal returns from that $1 billion is 5 to 10 times higher than if that $1 billion is being given as fertilizer subsidy or power subsidy or credit subsidy. So for researchers like us, it's a major challenge to convince the political masters that this is not the way to go. But the problem is, they feel with this, very quickly they can get political votes. The horizon, if you have a longer horizon, because the investments will take time to give you returns, but those who have turned the table, and that's one thing what I want to give about Gujarat. Gujarat is the only state where water table is coming up, where the power subsidy is going down, and you have a situation where the chief minister was returned to power 3 times. So it can be done. I think some other states will hopefully follow, and this is a major challenge. Food and fertilizer. Now, food subsidy is also added on to that. It's not the input subsidy story. I'll come to the food side maybe the next, this is the one. We did hear yesterday about right to food, and I had been, in a big dilemma within India on this issue, whether this is a model, because this is all coming from UN philosophy of rights, everything as a right. How do you do it? How do you give it? At present, the situation is we want to give food subsidy literally at 10% of the cost. It costs us 22 rupees wheat. We give 14 rupees per kg to the farmer, but the moment government touches wheat, the cost goes up by 50%. 22 rupees, we want to give it at 2 rupees to the consumer. 75% of the rural people we want to cover. And these 75% are, who are they? They are producers of food. They are basically in farming or living on farms. Now, why do you want to first ask them, okay, give me everything and then I'll give you back the same thing by adding 50% cost? I think a huge savings are there, but this was the last government that had passed the act. No other political party could oppose that in the parliament. So it's an act, and we are trying to find out a way how to do it best through cash transfers if possible, so that you can save a lot of things. And that's why I think this question of making everything as a right and at what price, whether it will be a model or a muddle, only time will tell. Our take on this is at present $22 billion worth of subsidy. About 50,000 crores are unpaid bills to the Food Corporation of India. Total is about $30+ billion per annum hit on that. If you put that in investments, your agriculture will be flying, your income generation in the rural area will be flying, and everything can be set right. So we have a different take on that. But high power subsidies are leading to problems. I was happy that some experts are working here on Punjab issue. The water table in the erstwhile Green Revolution seat, Punjab Haryana belt in northwest of India, is going down by 33 centimeters every year. This is one of the dramatic falls, and the real culprit is rice. Rice takes in that part about 1 kilogram of rice is about 5,000 liters of water. And we are exporting 10.5 million tons of rice. That is exporting 50 billion cubic meters of water. If you don't price properly power, you are giving a perverse incentive, distorting your cropping patterns, and therefore that becomes unsustainable. That is where your question of sustainability comes. So the real challenge is on correctly pricing energy. If you can do that, sustainability can be improved. We are also told by climate change experts, rising temperatures, whether they will be 2 degrees up or 4 degrees up, all scenarios of IPCC, but 1 degree centigrade up, we get a hit of 5 million tons of wheat. That's what the agriculture experts and climate experts have worked it out. If 2 degrees up, 10 million tons down. Now, when that will be there, but Government of India has started working, identifying those wheat varieties in the warmer regions which can survive, and those are being promoted in the upper regions of Punjab, Haryana, if that situation comes. So things are already up on that. We are going to face floods in the Himalayan and the Tarai belt. That's what. So intensity is going to increase of this, frequency is going to increase. What's the role of technology and farming practices? Where are the business opportunities? GMOs, we have talked a lot, so I can skip that. I'm a great supporter of GMOs, so take it whatever understanding I have got, but we have been not fully able to convince the policy makers yet. They are still sitting on the wall between US and Europe. One leg is in Europe and one leg is in US. That's the policy situation in India. But I'm hopeful. You know, major policy reforms come only when crisis comes. Remember that. And at present we are in a reasonably comfortable situation on food front. So they can have that luxury of doing this. But I hope rationality will prevail sooner or later. There is delay, yes, and I very much appreciate, we tweeted immediately who is responsible for this 12 years of delay and $2 billion of loss on golden rice and eyesight loss. Precision farming, I think that's easier to push politically, and but implementing that at a smallholder economy, that's going to be a challenge. What the machines would be, what the cost would be, laser leveling and all that has already started in India. Farming practices also, we are working towards more of, for rice particularly, either what we call SRI, system rice intensification, which is a part of a bigger program, or direct seeding of rice. There are estimates about 25% of water can be saved. But in other parts of sugarcane, which is also another water gulper, if you can put on the drip, you can save 50% water. So drip and all these farming practices to save water on that. Future growth of agriculture is going to be in high value products, and that's where building of value chains is important, because at present India is losing 25 to 30% of this fruits and vegetables because of lack of value chains. In the opening of this conference, it was told that developing countries lose from farm to plate, but really the situation in the developed countries is in the after the consumer takes it or in the supermarkets, that's where the loss is. But I hope the worst is over and we'll be working on that. India is the largest producer of milk, but only 20% is being processed yet by the organized sector. So there is a huge business opportunity to take it forward. And if the processing comes in a big way, there is a greater incentive for the farmer to raise productivity, improve all the breeds and whatnot. All the science can go into that. Same thing in horticulture. We are the second largest producer of horticulture in the world, 269 million tons. Less than 5% of fruit and vegetable is being processed. So that's what is leading to cotton, rice, all these things. I think tapping business, we will have to get few things right, get the incentive structures right. There are issues of markets because there are a lot of hurdles by the government on policies called APMC Act and so on and so forth. I can't get into all the details. Getting investments right, switching from subsidies to investments, getting institutions right. Many of the states don't allow land lease between farmers even. So we have to free up the land lease market. This is a huge domestic agenda, and only then the innovations get moving on that. I think structurally, much of agriculture, marketing and institutions are in the mode of a socialist regime that we were following in 60s and early 70s. So that transformation is yet to take place. I'm happy that the Prime Minister has set up a high-powered committee to look into the laws which are redundant in today's economy and just delete them, because it is the old laws which are blocking many of those things. We talked about this, adaptation policies for climate change, GMOs, drought-resistant seeds, or more drip irrigation or SRI. Buffer stocking of water, recharging groundwater. That's another thing that a state like Gujarat did. And the success story was not just BT cotton, but it came from where the check dams, when the chief minister took over, he had only 10,000 check dams, and he saw the benefit of it. He scaled up to 150,000 check dams all over in the Saurashtra region. That's how water table started coming up. And then he used the drip, and that's where the revolution came, along with technology, assured irrigation, and that took off. So I think there is a lot of recharging has to be done. There is talk of linking of the rivers in India, because eastern part has more water and flooding, and western part is scarcity of water. These are big investment, but at a small scale, some interlinking of river has started. I think in the years, hopefully, something will be done. But we may have to check on how to control this rice and sugarcane in water scarce regions. That's okay. Usha had said that I may have some numbers. Beef eating, healthy, but 7 kilograms of grain to 1 kilogram of your, so conversion ratio of energy is 7:1. Hogs in China, 5:1. India, Hindus, and that's a challenge. That's a question people ask, how far Indians will not take beef. I feel before you understand agriculture of any country, you have to understand the culture of that country. And from even high income, Usha belongs to a high income group in India. I belong to a middle income group in high India. And our children, but we have never tasted meat. There are only 21%, 24% people consume chicken. Chicken is in India a very efficient converter of energy, 1.6 to 1. That's the conversion ratio, compared to 7:1 or 5:1. Yes, and what is the frequency? It's not every day. Only 1.5% of monthly per capita expenditure, only 1.5% is going on meat. So it's a very, even those who eat meat, the frequency is so low, that's where the pressure on feed. I was comparing China and India China needs anywhere from 150 to 200 million tons for feed demand, grain. India is doing with 20, 25. So that's the difference. How long India will stay? Next 20 years, I don't think India is going to change its value system or culture. Investment in infrastructure and processing, I think the worst is over. That's behind us, and it's going to improve. The savings on wastages will be less. Streamlining subsidy policies, that is a big challenge. And I feel at least 30% can be saved easily if we have the guts to take this on. And hopefully that will be our challenge too. There would be a pressure after 2030. Up to 2030, I'm not worried on India's food security and sustainability question. After 2030, 40, around that, we will have to see if new technologies and if we get our house in order, we will survive and have a healthy diet and in a reasonably sustainable manner. Thank you very much.
Okay. Getting to your last point, I wonder if you would comment on demographic transition in India, because that would relate to issues post 2030.
Yeah, demographic, at present we are saying demographic dividend. As I said in the beginning itself, 65% of Indians are less than 35 years of age today. So we are one of the youngest nations and the largest. So the workforce is going to be increasing in the years to come. And it is with that mobility, urbanization also is going to come to that. So the demand is definitely going to increase for food. Whether it will switch towards meat, I have a question mark on that. And I don't see any major reason that the value system of India, which is centuries old, is going to dramatically change. Yes, there will be people, it's a big taboo within the Hindu system to take beef. There may be a few who come to US or others start, but I doubt the large mass of Indians will take that. So if your question is demographic change can lead to this or yeah.
I'm referring to demographic to the total fertility rate with women over time, increased women education,
Yeah.
gender roles, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, I think the biggest challenge that is going to be there is skilling India, what we call, the skills. Because these people are going to require more investment in education, the demand for that, and the movement towards high productivity jobs will depend upon how best we can skill them. Gender questions, mortality rates are falling. Yes, there is an issue of, in certain pockets, preference for sons rather than daughters. But I think it's not going out of bound. The latest census has revealed things are improving, not worsening. And that gives me hope that the society will move to a more neutral place in terms of gender balancing. Certain states may still remain, but the overall force in which the direction it is moving, I do feel the worst is behind us. So improvement, how fast we can move, the leadership, the policies will matter, but the direction makes me much more optimistic than 10 years back, what it was.
Thank you for optimism. At the risk of having a cloud come over How do you reconcile the growth we're seeing in the agricultural sector in India with Richard Heinberg's presentation last night on peak oils? Surely much of this growth is being fueled by fossil fuel imports.
You know, the energy consumption in agriculture and in the rest of the society, our levels of energy consumption are way, way below 1/10 of the American standards or 1/3 of the Chinese levels. So, as we are coming up, yes, there is going to be, but this realization that we have to get out of this fossil fuel business as early as possible, I think one of the things that has been jointly declared by President Obama and Prime Minister Modi is on solar energy joint efforts on that. Because he has this vision of 100 smart cities. And first thing of 100 smart cities is how do you make them energy efficient? And energy efficient means solar. I think Gujarat was the first state to have the biggest solar plan. I think 3,000 megawatts or so, they are working on that. So this question, how best you can reduce, how fast you can reduce the costs of solar cells, and if the energy price goes up. You know, my first thing to yesterday's presentation, my first submission was, one lesson that we should learn, don't subsidize fossil fuels. In fact, if that is the thing, we should be doing some taxation of that to check the externalities. Right? If we do that, they showed in 2002 the price was $25 a barrel and 2012 was 100, 4 times. Think about in the next 10 years, if the price goes from 100 to 400, there will be 20 other alternatives of renewable energy that will come. We are close to that. So, my feeling is that even if you go to $200, all this solar energy and other things, because now the gap is much less. What is happening? Coal is costing us, like, I'll give you the best examples, that between 4 to 5 rupees a kilowatt hour. Solar energy is costing us about 8 to 9. The days of 12 and 13 are gone, 8 to 9. So it's but coal, we are not counting the externalities, how much damage we are doing to environment. So if you start putting that tax and put some research further on solar to bring those costs down, I think there would be a point when that switch will start taking place. So if we have to build these 100 new cities, that will be a challenge, but I'm not worried, because I was looking at the numbers of our CO2 emissions and China's and US. At 20 tons, we are at 2 tons. So not much of a worry. No.
Excellent presentation. One of the things that when you look at a country like India that is really developed communication, what is the role of agribusiness? How do you see India basically not only being a producer of food, but producing of chemicals, producing of equipment, all the issue of supermarket, all these elements that basically of infrastructure that it's outside the farm gate that is really important in China, the US, everywhere. India probably has an incredible potential in this area.
Sure. At one point I was thinking whether India will be the biggest food factory in the world or not in the next 20 years, 30 years, because the demand is going to be more. But building this entire infrastructure, that's where the business opportunities are. I think process has started off. I was looking at the tractors because of the wage rate increase and people moving out of agriculture, mechanization will start. And the tractor industry, as I said, is going up by 15 to 20% per annum. In fact, the largest tractor manufacturer, Mahindra's, tweeted a few days back that we consider US economy as an emerging country for us because our sales in US of Mahindra tractors are increasing at 35 to 40% per annum. They already have a tie-up in China, right? And they are producing and selling. Of course, John Deere may, but John Deere in India is only 5% of the game. And Indian is making inroads into China, into US and China doing. So this question of the business opportunity, and it can be a producer, I'm pretty sure very soon in Africa you will see Mahindra tractors as Tata trucks and other things. And I think low cost, large scale production, that is what this Prime Minister, particularly on the manufacturing base, whether it is agri-commodity or any other, that's his focus on that. Because China's phase of low-cost manufacturing is now gradually going out because their costs are increasing. We will hopefully enter into that phase. Indian wage rates are still much lower compared to the global.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. But could I ask, on climate change, some of India's largest rivers are very dependent on snowmelt.
Yep.
And we know that the snow line is rising, and that's going to alter the timing of water delivery to these rivers. What impact is that going to have on agriculture?
Yeah.
Been estimated?
Particularly that's one of the things I was saying was that already predictions are that we are likely to have flooding in the Himalayan range and the Tarai belt, what we call the slopes, which is the Indo-Gangetic plain, the most fertile one. And we are already seeing, actually this year itself, Jammu and Kashmir has experienced one of the worst floods in the last 60 years. And last year we had in Uttarakhand such a deluge of water washing away so many lives and property and damage. So that thing is coming. And we are realizing we are not finding a good handle on the solutions. One, we have been talking, in fact, the Prime Minister made visits to Nepal because that's where water can be stored. And then you can do hydro power generation also and start controlling the floods also. So I think India, Nepal particularly, and maybe on the other side, what is happening on the Chinese front, because Brahmaputra, one of the big rivers, is coming from that side to this side. So you will have to find out solutions when the melting takes place and a lot of water comes, how to hold it or what to do with it. I think realization is coming. Action at present is very, very minimal. And that's why we are seeing all this damage. Last 2 years have been an eye-opener. At present, they are doing firefighting to reorganize the disaster management teams, how to, take care of the people affected. But finding a permanent solution to that type of a problem, I think at least 3-4 countries need to sit together in the Himalayan region and those states. And massive investments would be needed perhaps to do that.
Ursula, this is more like a comment for your point there that says vegetarian culture in this
Sorry?
For food security and sustainability.
Uh-huh.
Well, I want to make a comment more from where I'm from. I'm from Peru. Mm-hmm. And I have seen here in this meeting to talk a lot about Africa, India, and US, but not too much about Latin America. Mm-hmm. We don't usually eat too much meat. We eat meat, but not too much. And I think one important key for that point too is also the education that the people has to have about what they really need to eat for being healthy.
I'm talking about this because in my country, in the last 5 years, there has been growing a very big conscious about food, the local food, and what and that if they want to continue having that food, they have to really care about where do they get that food. An example is that we eat a lot of also seafood, another source of meat. And the people that is pushing the sustainability of this resource are usually the chefs or the people that wants to continue eating that, so they don't really buy fish when they are small size, or the ones that you don't want to be catch from the sea. Another example is that in my country is one of the origin centers from quinoa, which is a very rich cereal for many different minerals, which is growing in the market here. The areas where it's grown in my country, which is the Andes, are the areas which are more poor, and they have a big amount of malnutrition kids. However, if they knew they have this kind of food, they will consume it more instead like only sell it. So I only want to make the point of education and all these kind of topics about how to feed a world that is growing on population. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, please join me in thanking Ashok.
Thank you.
Illinois.